everyone, welcome back to the NaNoWriMo YouTube channel. My name is Sierra, I am a writer and editor, and today I'm going to be giving you tips that I have learned from being an editor that will make you a stronger writer. Step number one, you want to know what editor is right for you. There are different types of editors for different stages in a novel's progression, and it's important that you book the editor that is right for you. There's a couple different types of editors out there. I will give you a quick overview of the top 3 that you will most likely need for your writing. First up are developmental editors. That's what I do. I look at the big picture of a novel. I look at plot, structure, character arcs, all of the pieces that make for a really good story. Developmental editors are going to let you know what doesn't work in your story. If there's a character that doesn't make sense, if there are dynamics that are lacking, or if the structure of the novel just really isn't flowing yet, they're going to give you the tips that you need to make that next draft even better and a tighter, more cohesive story. Then you have the copy editors or line editors. Those are people who look at the minute details. They're going to be looking for the readability and flow of your sentences and making sure that they're structured correctly. They're also going to look at the more minute details of grammar and spelling errors and punctuation. And then we have proofreaders. These are the editors who look specifically for punctuation, grammar, and spelling errors. They're going to look line by line, word by word to make sure that there are no mistakes left in the draft. These are the editors who come in right at the end before publication. You absolutely can have the same person be a developmental editor, a copy editor, and a proofreader, but I really encourage you to get different people to read your work so that you have 3 different sets of eyes on your writing. Tip number 2, listen to real conversations. One of the biggest issues I run into as a developmental editor is clunky dialogue. So oftentimes writers, especially in their first few drafts, have dialogue that might be a little bit too expository, which means that it's explaining the plot more than necessary, or it's stating rather than showing a character's emotions. I always urge my clients who are struggling with dialogue to go out and to listen to real conversations. That means going to the mall, going to the park, going to school, going to work, and just taking a moment to quietly listen to the conversations going on around you. Listen to how people interact. What do they say to each other? What do they reveal? What do they not reveal? When someone's talking to their mother versus their friend versus their teacher, how do they choose their words differently? Those are the kind of details that you can put into your dialogue that will make it feel so much more like a real conversation. Put that people watching to good use. Tip number 3, know proper formatting. There are a lot of areas of writing where you can be creative and there are no rules, but formatting is one of the places where you need to follow a certain structure, especially if you want to get published and you want to seem professional. There are 3 areas of formatting that I saw the most mistakes as an editor. The first being dialogue. Common mistakes here include using a period instead of a comma. For example, "It is raining," she said, with a period and a capital S, instead of "It is raining," she said, with a comma and a lowercase s. 2, paragraphs. Make sure that they are broken up, typically 3 to 4 sentences long, though that can vary, and linked by an idea. Chapters. Make sure you're being consistent and breaking up the narrative where it makes sense. Usually I encourage people to look at natural breaks, whether in emotional arcs or in the action, or if something ends with a good cliffhanger. Those are usually good times to break up the narrative. You're gonna have some chapters be longer than others, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb that you don't wanna have a 30-page chapter followed by a 1-page chapter, followed by a 5-page chapter. There are so many great resources on the NaNoWriMo website and blog that can help you get started with formatting. Tip number 4, avoid play-by-plays. Your character does this, then they do this, then they do this, then they do this, and it lacks emotion, it lacks any real purpose for being part of the narrative. For example, someone I worked with a few years ago was working on a novel and they had the same scene about 4 different times. She'd wake up, she would go to the bathroom, she'd get dressed, she'd eat her breakfast, she'd be late for work. It got to the point where it was incredibly repetitive in the narrative and it didn't make any sense. It wasn't adding anything. Unless you're writing a Groundhog Day-like situation where you need that repetition because it's part of the story, most times you can skip the unnecessary details and go straight to what is driving the plot. You can definitely use that sort of a format to introduce your character. Have your character waking up in the morning and the way they wake up tells you a little bit about themselves. They overslept again, or their alarm clock plays the Looney Tunes theme. They might wake up in a room full of 5 other people because they live with all of their siblings in a small house. That's a necessary character detail. You want to make sure that every scene in your novel has a point. Either it's introducing a character, it's deepening a character, it's introducing a plot point, it's deepening that plot point, it's adding to the plot and the narrative structure in some way where you have the most tight and cohesive story and you don't have a lot of filler scenes. Tip number 5, let your characters make mistakes and be wrong. Some of you may have encountered characters that you felt were really unrealistic because they were too perfect. In order for readers to relate to your story, you need believable and relatable characters. And that means having characters with flaws. It doesn't make them any less of a hero or a heroine or an epic person if they make a mistake, if they don't do something right the first time. Sometimes writers have characters in their narrative that are stand-ins for themselves. They want those characters to be the best version of themselves, or they don't want to see themselves as having flaws. Well, here's the thing. We all have flaws, and it's awesome. It's what makes us unique. It's what makes us who we are. And sometimes it's our flaws that end up being our most powerful asset and help us become the best version of ourselves. Use those flaws in your story and accept them in yourself. Not to sound like Karamo Brown, but it's true. The 6th and final tip, don't send in your first or second or maybe even third draft to an editor. One of the biggest mistakes I've encountered with clients is that they send me their first draft. Do not send your first draft to an editor because that first draft is you just figuring out the story. Most of the time is kind of a bit of word vomit. You're just figuring out what the story is, you're putting out all your ideas, you're getting to know your characters, and it's not really the most cohesive narrative. So then when you get that editor, if they're looking at a first draft, they are gonna have to do so much more work, but then end up doing work on something that probably will change a whole lot anyways. You need to be your first editor. You need to look at that first draft and figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what you like, what you don't like, and then rewrite it to a place where you feel like it's ready for someone else to take a look at it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned something new. Don't forget to check out the resources on the NaNoWriMo website and their blog. I will see you in the next video. Bye!